Quick disclaimer, One Piece spoilers ahead. This video contains spoilers for all the One Piece series. There's a scene in One Piece, during the Whole Cake Island arc, where a seemingly inconsequential treasure chest, unrelated to the immediate plot, falls from a castle, by accident, in the middle of a chaotic conflict and what looked like a win for the villains, and then just randomly explodes and topples the structure the battle was taking place on. This then initiates a chain of events that allows for a protagonist to get away from a situation that appeared to be against their favor. Honestly, for the longest time, I've come to associate the use of fate and destiny in fiction as lazy writing or more of the same thing, so much so that my mind quickly jumps to words like cliches or deus ex machinas or chosen ones or prophecies or plot conveniences or contrivances or assholes. Well, you get the gist of it. And immediately I'm like, well, I can't believe more negative associations kept coming up. But does it have to automatically equate to lazy or poor writing? Nowadays, these tropes have been worn out so much, it's honestly hard to imagine newer stories coming up with interesting and novel ways of implementing such an archaic plot device. For instance, when you hear that something was meant to be or fated, and you've experienced storytelling enough, it's hard not to go like, okay, well, thank you for your services, please next. But despite my occasional skepticism, One Piece does something with its use of fate and destiny that I've genuinely come to appreciate over time. Now, for One Piece fans out there, I want to be mindful that this is a divisive topic within the fandom, so please bear with me. Also, quick side note, this video is not about discussing any thematic clashes between the free will and predetermined inevitability in the series. This will be a little different. First things first. To start with what we mean by fate. In the context of fiction, fate or destiny, and I'll be using them interchangeably, refers to a series of predetermined events that occur beyond a character's control. Usually, it implies that there is an inevitable outcome awaiting a character somewhere down the line, usually the protagonist. And due to the lack of agency from the characters, this trope tends to be labeled as a common example of plot convenience, i.e., when unlikely things take place because the situation calls for it, either because of plot armor or chosen one shenanigans. Let's go back to that example from the beginning. This development is plot convenience. It didn't really need to happen this way, but Oda, the author of One Piece, chose to include this exploding treasure chest here to depict how fate is seemingly on Luffy's side. And this isn't the first time nor the last time something like this happens in the story. For instance, Luffy gets struck by lightning in Loguetown, which frees him from getting executed by Buggy. Then Luffy uses Conqueror's Haki, something he doesn't even know he's doing, to save Ace right before he gets executed. We also get Roger, of all people, being saved by random weather changes in his fight with Shiki. And everyone keeps pointing out the similarities between Roger and Luffy, so there is a connection there too. Point being, these are the chosen ones, fate is on their side, and unlikely things are happening to get them where they must be. On a surface level, these uses of fate and the chosen one trope aren't very different than most other uses of the trope. And I want to be careful here because I acknowledge that some people don't like it when we bring up the whole chosen one shtick in relation to the series. But to me, the first curious thing about these developments in One Piece is that fate always seems to be accompanied by massive amounts of destruction. This isn't a quiet, non-conflictive, or even subtle version of fate. No, this is a loud and screw everyone's property and sense of safety version of fate. And this quality applies to many other uses of fate in One Piece. If we were to take Luffy as a straight-up chosen one character, like, let's hypothetically confirm him as such. He's the Joy Boy, he was the man Roger was waiting for, and he was the one chosen by his fruit. For a person meant to do great things, regardless of whether he wants to or not, he seems to inflict tons of collateral damage everywhere he goes, which always goes unpunished. In other Chosen One or Fate-based stories, when protagonists do stuff like this, they're usually reprimanded or told to be more careful. Which, to be fair, does happen in One Piece, but Luffy rarely ever cares. Or the character's actions are moralized, which I would also link to the Fate trope. Because isn't fate generally written as a benevolent force? Greek tragedies aside, good is usually destined to triumph over evil. The light beats the darkness and spreads prosperity, Jedi beats Sith, Harry beats Voldemort, Link beats Ganon, Naruto and his allies win the war. But in One Piece, fate seems to favor multiple characters with allegiances to different factions, values, and ideologies. Now in fiction, fate as a trope has been subverted countless times, and the idea of the chosen many isn't exactly new. Case in point, the different Lanner Corps in the DC universe who are chosen by their rings, and arguably the different JoJos in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure who are each born with a star birthmark. One Piece follows a similar subversion with the D clan. Throughout the story, we get to meet a handful of characters who, despite not seemingly being related by blood, all share a D initial in their name. All these people who carry the D initial, all of them are acting as agents of fate, like cogs in historical machinery. Roger found Shanks in God Valley and raised him as a pirate, which then allowed Luffy to eat the Gomu Gomu fruit. This then allowed Shanks to stop the Marineford War years later. Another example would be Law, for instance. He came to Marineford at the last minute, which then allowed Luffy to be saved. Saul is another great example of this. He intervened to rescue Robin, which then allowed her to survive and meet Luffy later in life, someone who is fundamental in his journey to find the One Piece. There's honestly plenty of other examples, but it seems that over and over, the story shows us that without any of these characters' actions and presence, the history of the world as a whole would have been in an entirely different place. And curiously, all these carriers of the D name belong to different factions. Some are Marines, others are pirates, others are revolutionaries. There doesn't seem to be one favored allegiance or ethic with the Ds, despite all of them being agents of the same fate, one way or the other. In fact, the story has shown us two members of the D clash against one another before, Blackbeard and Ace, and describe their battle as a crossroads of fate. In other words, a meeting of different paths moved by destiny with an unknowable outcome. This seems to imply that despite things being fated, they could go either way, which challenges the traditional linear notion of historical determinism, or even events being predetermined and unchangeable. Going back to that Greek tragedy idea, this might seem a bit tangential, but fate from the perspective of classic Greek storytelling tends to refer to something entirely different. In the case of Greek tragedy, fate is often a negative result a character is struggling against, and one that they might not know about. In other words, an inevitable calamity is just around the corner, waiting to happen, and there's nothing you can do about it. Despite One Piece's general leaning towards comedy and its complicated relationship with killing characters, this idea lines up well with the deaths of members from the D-Clan in the story. These characters are considered enemies of the gods and tend to die young, tragically, and without much of an option, pretty much only to act as these cogs to a much greater flow of fate. Look at a character like Ace. Oda wrote Ace to represent a sort of failed chosen one, someone who everyone around him saw as a shining beacon lighting their way towards safety, happiness, and greatness. And by the way, real quick, I'd recommend you to read the Ace novels for more context. But Ace was also someone chasing an expected path towards fame, even though deep down, he lived in constant discontent and emptiness wherever he went. This is yet another subversion of these Chosen One's story being put to page in the series. And to make fate-based matters more complex, we haven't even talked about Conqueror's Haki. Let's talk about that for a bit. Now, the same thing we just talked about pertaining to the D's, the same could be said about Conqueror's Haki. Conqueror's Haki isn't something strictly connected to the theme of fate in One Piece, but it is used as a plot device to allude to characters that are born to become important later in life. It is a rare ability that only 1 in several million people are born with, emphasis on born with, and it is said that those who possess this type of haki have the qualities of a king, almost like they're destined to rule or to lead. Problem is, there are D's with Conqueror's Haki, but most people with Conqueror's Haki aren't even from the D clan. Arguably, this is another group of chosen ones we're talking about. So if 2 non-exclusive groups of people are chosen either to be someone important or do something important, then who, or better yet, what, is fate favoring? My only hypothesis so far is that fate is always favoring freedom and equality as natural and fundamental forces via its different chosen ones, but there's no one way of going about it. I'm just gonna leave that discussion up to you guys. There are 2 more things though, Luffy and Blackbeard. Even in stories revolving around the chosen many trope, there's always one who has more relevance or importance than the rest. However, One Piece seems to have 2 people like that. Just like Luffy, Blackbeard was chosen by its fruit. He even says it was fate. He also runs into out-of-nowhere developments that save him from certain doom, like when he meets Shiryu who gives him the antidote for Magellan's poison, or like when he gets the things he wants despite being outnumbered, overpowered, or not having much of a plan to begin with. And Blackbeard is a total asshole who selfishly manipulates, pillages, steals, subjugates, and kills. And Luffy isn't the most outstanding, lawful citizen either. He's pretty selfish himself, admittedly. As we said at the beginning, many of his antics go unpunished. He is a pirate after all. Madame Shirley even foretold that Luffy would destroy Fisherman Island in her prophecy. Also, is it just me, or does Nika seem a bit unhinged? Oda even drew Luffy as being taken over by Nika, and this is how it looked. For a character that seems to symbolize laughter and liberation, it sure looks pretty wild. So is fate supposed to be malevolent in One Piece? Because so far it seems to be pretty neutral, pretty in the middle. All in all, One Piece seems to be a story where diverse versions of fate and chosen ones can coexist, with most of them representing contradictory and even conflicting ideals and lifestyles, which is only the icing on the cake. And quick tangent, this is me being a bit salty, but many people got angry at the Nika reveal in Wano, thinking that Luffy was now another privileged shonen protagonist being benefited by determinism. But it is definitely more complicated than that. It's not just Luffy who is privileged and benefiting from fate, and there's no such thing as one determined fate in the One Piece world. Now admittedly, this is going to be a bit of a weird way of ending this video, because so far this video has been mostly focused on analyzing and discussion, but I'm going into a bit of theory territory. As a fan, it's impossible to imagine One Piece ending in any sort of tragedy. However, considering Madame Shirley's prophecy and the many fan theories about Luffy unifying the seas, let's consider what we've talked about so far. If fate in One Piece is neutral, and Luffy is an agent of fate like many others, what is Luffy's fate going to be? It's really hard to say, but its conclusion seems to be building towards Luffy's specific fate being to bring forth a tragedy necessary to pave the path towards whatever Laugh Tale has in store for the world at large. Almost like a tragedy before the comedy that will liberate the world. And honestly, that seems appropriate, all things considered. And that's the video. Thank you for watching. I appreciate the time that you've devoted to this video, and I would honestly appreciate any feedback that you could provide. This is something that I've been meaning to do for a while, so please like, comment, and subscribe.